I have gathered you all again to announce that Yushvi has officially declared war. Trophius stood in front. We will proceed with heading down to the Middle Realm. Every god and goddess were present at the time, each standing in their group sections. There was a large portal behind Trophius, and he walked in to begin. Jolan led his group first as Julius followed. Kari's group was the last to leave, and the portal closed. They all entered a vast brown field and noticed an army standing multiple feet away. Trophius flew over to the one leading them, and then came back to inform that it was simply a kingdom assisting the gods. Waiting for a signal for about an hour, a dark fog slowly rose in the distance. Trophius gave the signal to quickly prepare for battle. Each god and goddess slowly amplified each other's abilities, reassuring victory. Klein went over to Kari to whisper important information. He also did the same to Julius and Jolan. The three hesitated to continue with their preparing, and separately made glances over to Master Trophius. "Did you finally let them know?" Talma groaned, powering up. "Yes, but do you really think this will change the outcome?" Klein almost felt terrified. "You saw that we lose the war, and no one would be left." Talma darted his eyes. Fate can be changed by the simplest actions. A rumble shook the ground and Talma almost tipped over, but he caught himself. Everyone else felt the ground shaking, and other higher gods began to panic. A commotion was brought through the crowd, and Trophius instantly rose his voice, shutting down the noise and pointing over to the dark fog that grew and grew. Slowly, an army of dark shadows and armored soldiers rapidly sped through the fog and began to charge at both the gods and the assisting kingdom. "All gods on standby with me," Trophius signaled again. "Goddesses, create a shield to protect the assisting kingdom until the shadows meet us." The gods stood behind Trophius in a rugged line, and the goddesses flew over to the kingdom's army and gave them their protection. The soldiers looked up and stared in awe as they all noticed beautiful maidens floating over them. Kari personally went down to give the leader her strongest protection as he looked down at her, barely recognizing each other. He sat on a golden horse with light blue barding. "Kari?" He spoke under his helmet, taking it off. Kari stopped, realizing he seemed vaguely familiar. "Have we met before?" You do not remember." He was interrupted by another rumbling in the ground. His horse cried out in fear and almost toppled the man over. Kari held her balance and looked back to the shadows and dark nights, realizing that they'd only gotten closer. The man yelled out to his archers to take aim. Kari quickly flew back to regroup with the others and continued preparing, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the shadows and dark nights ran, they grew in number. Jolan's group was sent out first. Julius had followed. Kari and the others were the only few left, and they witnessed the horror and terror brought onto the lower gods. They perished almost in an instant. The higher gods could barely manage and face the same fate. Talma grunted and charged himself early into the darkness and quickly blasted away the corruption. Klein and Klin followed, but stopped after seeing the fog clear out. Almost 2,000 meters ahead of them, there was empty land, completely burnt out by Talma. Talma charged up both of his arms, watching the shadows and nights increase into thousands more. Instantly, he tripled the amount of power and length of his blast, aiming it into a straight, thick line. Kari helped amplify it by giving him a temporary ability boost. For a few more minutes, it was quadrupled in massive blasts, taking out 70% of the dark shadows and nights. The kingdom assisting nearby was almost wiped out. They did not know how powerful the Dark Army was, let alone Yushvi herself. "Fall back!" The leader yelled out to his soldiers. "Fall back!" As they listened to the order, they proceeded to charge into the opposite direction, running away. Too many were lost, and the man turned back to continue fighting on his own. There was only Julius and Julian left far out the front, still fighting off the horde. Though Kari assisted Tama with his power, she began to feel concern for the man fighting all by himself, as if it was nagging at her heart. Tama stopped for a moment and rested himself by sitting on the charred ground. Kari went over, using a restoration spell on him. He lightly pushed her away, pointing to the lonesome leader. "You know him," he grunted, turning to her. "Just go and help him. He will need it more than I." "But I barely know him," Kari started. "Go!" Tama yelled. Kari was startled and slowly rose to turn, looking at the man barely struggling to fight. Then memories suddenly flooded into her mind, almost all at once. It wrenched at her heart, finally making her run and fly over to him. Out of all of the moments she went through, she finally remembered. That was Jake, the young elf she loved so much. Stopping in front of him, she blasted away any nearby shadows or nights, placing a force field over them both. Kari looked directly at him, with tears falling down her face. Jake had a sword in his hands, and it slowly fell as he realized what had happened. The two ran and hugged each other, feeling a momentary peace inside the force field. "I thought you chose to forget." Jake let go and looked down. Kari shook her head, covering her teary eyes with her hand. "I could not bear it anymore. I still had the necklace. I began to remember you again." Jake suddenly noticed Julius fighting on the outside, reminded of the prophecy. He brought his eyes back to Kari, gently petting her hair for a moment. A rumble came from the outside of the force field, and Kari lost her balance. Jake caught her, and they both looked around for anything off. Then they saw him. The one with swirling, dark purple aura around their armor. Screeches of death were heard as their spirits latched onto him along the sides. And he stomped his way through the dark shadows. Wraith, the God Slayer. End of section 15.